Alright guys, welcome back to Beyond the Blueprint, and as I said in my last video, we're going to be talking again about draft presentation. I touched on it a little bit in the What the Franchise video, but just to recap, if you didn't see that, the main thing we're looking to do is add life to the draft and make it feel different than anything else that you do in the offseason, and try to make the feel of the draft match its significance as well. Now, before I get into any specifics, I'm going to say that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today isn't nearly as far as things could be taken, and that's kind of on purpose. Obviously, with stuff like this, you could blow it out and go huge, but I've never been too much a fan of that kind of approach, and the reason why is because usually when that happens, it severely hinders what can be done or what is done elsewhere, because you're going all in on this one thing, so everything else kind of becomes secondary. And whenever I'm looking at building or improving upon a feature, I'm usually willing to sacrifice that go big approach for something that is more capable of being built upon year over year, rather than being something that is this huge add one year but then kind of goes untouched and unimproved moving forward. But the first thing we're going to hit on is some of the visual presentation, and what you're going to be seeing here is a few mock-ups from the original CFM post. So overall you get a very similar look to what you're used to, but here you also get the CFM ticker across the bottom turning into the draft ticker, which is just going to scroll through draft picks just like you'd see during the TV broadcast of the draft. And then rather than having the picks with the clock vertically down the side on the left, we're again basically emulating a TV broadcast here with the bar across the bottom. And this is where when a team is on the clock, it would scroll through relevant information to that team. You can show anything from records, rankings, team needs, players added, players lost, recent first rounders. There's a ridiculous amount of information that can be utilized there that keeps you in touch with what's been happening around your league and brings that information to you rather than you having to go search for it or not knowing that information. And then obviously when a selection is made, you're going to get the animation at the bottom and a notification of which player was selected, and then again you could show some information pertaining specifically to that player there if you wanted to do that. The main thing here as well is that even with adding all of this, you still have full view and full control of your draft board, so you don't need to go into any different menus or anything like that. Everything you need is still right at your fingertips, just as it normally would be, but with those added presentation elements. And then the next thing I wanted to hit on is just the overall presentation and feel of the draft. Like I said before, a lot of this stuff is going to be very basic in nature, with the key being that it's very easy to build and expand upon. But before I get into anything, I'm going to show you a couple of very crude video mock-ups that I made a while back from the CFM post. So let's take a look at those real quick.
With the first selection in this year's NFL Draft, the New York Jets selected the Cleveland Browns are on the clock. With the first selection in this year's NFL Draft, the New York Jets selected the Cleveland Browns are on the clock.
Alright, so there's a couple things there that we're going to discuss, and the first is going to be the pick reactions. This is something that was done back in the glory days of franchise mode during the Xbox PS2 era, and it's just something that adds a little bit of immersion and intrigue to the picks. I don't know how you guys felt about it, but it was always fun for me to go through the draft and decide on guys and then see how that reaction was going to play out. You could add some logic to this to where if you're a team like the 49ers and you end up taking a quarterback in the first round, then the crowd's going to probably boo because that's not a team need and it's just not a move that the fans would probably like. But then if you're in a situation like the Chargers just this past weekend to where you get a guy like Derwin James to fall to you, so people are going to love that pick and the crowd goes wild potentially. At the very least here though, what you could do is you could simply use the true value or the true talent compared to where a player was taken and elicit a reaction that way. If a player is a big enough steal or a value, then there's going to be a cheer. If he's a big enough reach, they're going to boo. Pretty simple. But I think it's just a cool thing that adds to the experience, in my opinion, and makes things a bit more interesting and a little bit more immersive as well. The second thing I wanted to hit on was the draft announcers. So in that video, I literally used a text-to-speech program to get the announcer in there. But in a perfect world, I wouldn't mind seeing Roger Goodell himself involved, at least for the first round. You bring him in for a day and he only really has to record like 100 lines or so between with the first overall pick in the NFL draft lines for the 32 picks, and then the Cleveland Browns select, Chicago Bears select, New York Giants select, and so on for the 32 teams, and then the relocation teams as well. He doesn't need to announce the players by name. Obviously, in a perfect world, that's what you'd want, but I'm willing to sacrifice that here. But Roger Goodell, best case scenario, if that's not possible to bring him in, then another option could be just taking audio from the draft itself and splicing that together, which is something that I think could also work. But if neither of those is an option, then another option would be to just get someone else that sounds good in to record that kind of audio. And the positive there would be that it would be much more possible to have the draft picks themselves announced if you were to do something like that and have somebody that could constantly come in. But again, that's probably still a little bit too far out there. But it's just a small thing that adds to the immersion and makes you feel like you're at the draft while also taking part in it. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds there. And then the last thing I want to hit on is what happens once a pick is made. And I'm going to go back to what I said at the beginning in regards to something that was really cool when it was first implemented was the draft stories and the draft pick descriptions with Adam Schefter. Hearing those stories or just the descriptions in general was a great add to CFM and made those picks of the draft really interesting. The problem is what I mentioned though, is it was a big ad, but it never really got built on. Originally there was 10 players with stories and they were always front and center in the news feed throughout the season. But when we look at that now, and as we're like 5 or 6 years past that original implementation, I'm pretty sure the number of stories is still limited to those 10, but I could be wrong there. And then with the news feed, everything is buried and harder to follow along with, so it's actually something that's seemingly taken a step backwards, or at best has been stagnated for the last several years since it was implemented, which is really unfortunate for something that is such a good ad and a great feature within the mode, really. And so lastly, what I'm looking to do is kind of expand upon that feature in a bit of a different way. With that, you're just getting the unique storylines, which I think is great, but I think it's very limiting. You don't want every other player to have some crazy storyline about how they played cricket in college, transitioned to rugby last week, and is now an NFL draft pick and stuff like that. But the one thing that isn't limiting at all is draft pick analysis. Every pick that is made can have analysis tied to it, and that analysis is something that in a lot of cases can be applied to multiple players and is also going to be virtually the same year after year. So while storylines are more interesting, analysis is something that is a bit easier to create because of how generic it can be, and then it's also something that can be used in a more broad manner as well. That's not saying that I want to get rid of the storylines. This would just be an addition to that. So the basic idea here is that after each pick, there's going to be some kind of short commentary to describe the prospect that was just taken. Right off the bat, that's going to sound like a pretty significant addition, but I think when you break it down, it's not nearly as crazy as it might seem. Just looking at this past weekend, I collected a few statements made by Mike Mayock about players taken in the first round. Now, looking at these, what you're going to notice is that there is nothing really that crazy specific in any of these. It's a lot of short generic statements pieced together to basically form a nice little description about each player, which is what we're going to be trying to emulate. You get traits, combine numbers, player comparisons. There's just a ridiculous amount of depth and possibilities within it. And again, here, getting a guy like Mike Mayock would be great and authentic, but not completely necessary at all, in my opinion. I think the best option would be to take a similar approach to what they've done with commentary with Brandon Godden and Charles Davis, where you get a lesser known guy that sounds good and that can come in as much as possible so that you can get as much commentary as you can at launch, but can also continually come in and continue to add to the catalog over the course of the year and over the course of multiple years as well, so that things not only don't get stale, but the feature itself becomes better and better with the more that you add. To go along with this, after each pick, you could have the visual side to accompany it with something like this. Just a basic overview of the player with his measurables, his college, and then you get those couple of bullet points that make a perfect segue for triggering those certain types of commentary and analysis, as I was talking about before. The pick comes in, it gets announced, you immediately go to something like this, hit on a couple of quick lines, and then it's on to the next pick. It doesn't need to be something that adds any more time to the process, just something that makes things more interesting while you're in it. Now usually I would have used mock-ups here, but I didn't think that that was really necessary because of this. I don't actually remember seeing this in long shot, but it's an achievement screenshot, and it was actually tweeted out by the EA Twitter the other day before the draft. But this is essentially exactly what I'd like to see and what I've been describing here. So there's that. One last thing I'm going to leave you with is just another very crude example of how something like this could look in game. So we're going to take a look at that real quick.
With the 14th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the New Orleans Saints select.
He's raw but gifted. I love his motor, his body type, and how raw he is coming out of school reminds me a lot of Ziggy Ansah.
Like I said, very crude, not exactly the best example to give you a good idea of how this could work in game, but just a bit better than just trying to explain it, and it gives you a slight idea of what it could be when you start to piece these things together a little bit. All in all though, I think something like this would add a lot to the draft and make it far more interesting than it currently is to not only play but to be a part of. It's also something that's easy to build on moving forward in my opinion. But that's going to do it. Hopefully I did a good job at conveying these ideas to you guys. Let me know what kind of things you'd like to see with the draft and what you like or don't like about it currently. My next video is going to be a What the Franchise video dealing with the relocation, customization, or lack thereof. And that should also be up hopefully by the end of the week. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, thanks for watching.